So looking over the responses to the post for Tuesday's class, I see that we have a lot of work to do. A lot of students just aren't getting it, that they're seeing Rousseau backwards and not understanding the main point of his argument. It may be one of the good qualities of AUIS students that they are attached to the value of learning and education, but so much so that in this case it's a liability. So we're reading a book that is an extremely harsh critique of mental advancements. Improvements in the sciences and the arts are corruptions as far as Rousseau is concerned. And education is a very bad and counterproductive thing, and that is perhaps an argument that some people have trouble hearing. So let me see if I can go back to the beginning of the book and help to make some sense of things. Rousseau chose two epigrams for his text, two quotes from famous Roman poets, and maybe that would help us out here. The first is from the famous Roman poet Ovid, who was exiled from the most sophisticated city of his day, Rome, to a very uncultivated, rustic area. And he's playing with the idea of civilization and barbarism. Who counts as educated, the simple person or the sophisticated person? We don't have to go into his paradox. We just have to understand that's the tricky topic that we are concerned with. Now on page 33, the second epigram from the poet Horace, we are deceived by the appearance of good, and that's happening to us. Education seems to be a good thing. Everybody says it's a good thing. But is it really? That's what Rousseau wants us to investigate. Here I am at the first part, the pages we spent our time in last class. Let's see if we can take another look and get a clearer picture. One thing you'll notice on this page, the phrase happy slaves. Now, you have to be alert, of course, to Rousseau's sarcasm and irony. Anything happy sounds good, but of course, a happy slave is not a good thing. A happy slave is a shameful and contemptible thing. Note 5 here on the bottom of the page 34, you're looking at just the second half of it. This is also helpful. Rousseau takes up the question of what he calls the savages in America, what are sometimes called the Indians and now the Native Americans, the original inhabitants of the Americas. Now, no one is less cultivated, less sophisticated. No one has less use for education. No one is stupider, you could say, than these people. But what is their condition? Well, they are not only uneducated, they're quite poor. They hardly have clothing to live in, and the only wealth they have comes from killing deer and buffalo. But how should we evaluate them? How should we value them? Well, they have the one quality that Rousseau thinks marks the best and most virtuous people. No one has ever been able to tame them, which means they always retain their liberty. How could it be that such a poor and uneducated people have the highest virtuous quality? Well, that's no surprise at all. In fact, it's almost automatic. It goes together. What yoke, what kind of servitude, what kind of tyranny could you impose on people if they don't need anything? Well, you can't offer them anything. You can't threaten them and to take away anything they value. And so this extreme example shows the paradox. The most virtuous people are the least cultivated, least educated, least advanced in the arts and sciences. Now I'm on page 35, which starts with a paragraph top left that shows a great praise for modern society. And this is part of the sophistication of the argument. Rousseau will often say, on the one hand this, but on the other hand that, and you have to read on to the next paragraph to get the on the other hand part, which is closer to his real point. So let's look at this paragraph. Rousseau has, as I say, great praise for his society. He says about his generation what we can say about ours, that it's the most educated and most advanced that history has ever seen. And he goes further. We might say that he praises the values of his society. The things they say are very good in their form. They represent a true taste and a true education. But now for what counts more, the meaning and importance of that. The problem is our exterior appearance, what shows on the outside, does not match what's true of us on the inside. If the last paragraph were true, that would be very pleasant, he says. But it's only an appearance of the truth when the reality is something quite different. And here we get into the paragraph we spent some time on last class. Just as people with bad bodies want to dress themselves up in elaborate clothing, people with bad souls want to live under elaborate conventions, so in both cases, so that their weakness and their vice doesn't show. Now, this paragraph at the bottom of the left column going over to the right gets to the heart of it. The problem with modern life is that we're not transparent, we're not sincere, we're dishonest, we're hypocrites. And here you may see that in going over Rousseau's arguments, we're getting to arguments that you probably have heard before. Rousseau was very influential, despite standing against things like education that we value very much. Rousseau's arguments were very strong, and they've been repeated so many times that often we know them, we may even think them, we may repeat them ourselves without understanding that Rousseau gave one of the first versions of them. But what does he say? That the advances in the sciences and the arts, in taste and sophistication, have taught us to do a difficult and tricky thing, that is, to seem to be something we're not. So, new forms of acting and behaving, new conventions, new rules, allowed us to learn something. We had to be taught to please each other according to these conventions. Before that, we were not so pleasing. We were crude and rustic. But on the other hand, we were natural. What we saw from our behavior, what you could see at first glance right away, was the true difference in character, what people really are. Here, Rousseau, who is never a naive or shallow arguer, reminds us that in the old days our nature was nothing better. We still had the same temptations we have now, but all of those temptations are worse because we've learned to cover them up. It used to be that we had not so much a higher virtue because we shared the same flawed nature we have now, but a greater security. You were safer because you could see where you were, you could understand the people around you. Now, this is the great safety and advantage that advances in sciences and the arts, because they have taught us so much and taught us to seem to be one thing while we really are another. That's the safety that those advances has taken away from us.